So, good evening, everybody. We're going to let our friends join us here in a bit. The Wiretap Live here with our wonderful brother, Frank Figliuzzi. Just got through doing an incredible set of information. You laid down a chock full of data set earlier, and there's a couple of them we will weave into this. And then we'll let our friends come in and maybe they have a few questions on the table as they join.
Yeah, be great.
As we warm up, I'll say this. I was pondering this document that from many, many years back that I shared with you, um, and some others that I wrote in the summer of 2020, the Boog threat. And it was all of those groups. In the very first group were the anti-government extremists, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, sovereign citizens. And, it just brings back that the reason why I was even in DC was the impeachment of Donald Trump, which was the Tulsi Gabbard story I had to weave together yesterday as well. So there's just so many things on the table with him trying to wipe the record of all of his crimes and everything. And now we're at the the 6 year mark almost since we had to go on MSNBC and warn people, hey, something's coming. So
True. True.
yeah.
Yeah, Donald Trump is clearly trying to rewrite history, erase history. And you're right, Chris, to point out he's doing it on so many different levels, so
Yeah.
many different angles that it's and yeah, the election, January 6th. Yeah, I know we're going to talk about it, and we should have a blood pressure trigger warning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People ask me here all the time, for the viewers who may not know me, some of you guys know Frank and some of you know both of us, but I live in war for 4 years now, and I'm remarkably okay with like the average day of war. It's turning on my phone and watching the news in America that sets me off at a level that is palpable. It increases my language skills here because I often have to explain my thoughts about Donald Trump and Witkoff and Vance, and I do it with a certain level of temperature going off. And I think my Ukrainian friends worry, and they said this tonight. Actually, I will say this to our viewers: my Ukrainian friends are worried about Americans now.
Isn't that something? Isn't
Very
that something? Yeah. It's a sad state of affairs when a country that's completely um, inundated with death and destruction on a nightly basis is worried about us. Really.
well. We call it occupied territory now. So it's really not good. But I'll tell you what, I think we, as usual with you around, especially this crowd comes in quick. So I don't want to waste time. Thank you tonight. Special 4 hour presentation about why things are so screwed up. We'll keep an hour. But essentially, I want to go back that in the summer of 2020 with the George Floyd protest in Minnesota, and actually, I'll even go a little bit before that with the Capitol little mini protest with guys showing up with guns. Remember when showing up with guns was perfectly okay so long as you're not black and you're not against ICE.
That's
Um,
yeah. We used to. That's right. Yeah, the far right used to be strong on the Second Amendment, but now, God help you if you show up protesting ICE with a weapon on your hip.
that's right.
Yeah.
And they started doing some weird things to where they conflated their efforts. And it was something you said to our friend Naveed Jamali that caused me to reach out and say, "Hey, Frank, I have some data to look at real quick." I want to start with asking you that. What was it that you saw that you remember most in that summer where that alarm went off for you? That things were going to get bad or potentially bad.
Oh my God, what didn't I see? Um, People responding. It was becoming clearer and clearer that people were unable to get to get to the truth. And they
Hmm.
were reacting and responding almost like a call and response
Hmm.
to what leaders and influencers were doing online. That really shook me up. That I was like, okay, we've now reached the point where, as Rudy Giuliani said, on an interview on Meet the Press one time. Truth is not the truth.
Right.
When I saw people really willing to act against self-interest, willing to risk physical harm, arrest, um, yeah, based on what other people were saying, and it wasn't the truth. Yeah, that was a wake-up call.
Yeah. And then we had some samples. Katie Tour had gone out to Staten Island and actually talked to people in that segment we had in September 2020, where they were saying fringy things. They were not going to accept a loss, and Trump had been kind of preconditioning his crowd to say, "There's only one way that this happens: is I win. Period. Anything else is not legit." And then she asked people that I think it's very important that that was on camera. Well, what are you willing to do? And one person says, well, we'll see. And another person looks right at it, says, whatever it takes.
Yeah,
Blinkingly, whatever it takes.
remember that. Yeah, people willing to give their lives for a false cause. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So let's go. Let's. A lot of people know that history in general, so we're not going to waste our time going through the history as much. We're going to talk about a little bit about where we're at now. And one of the things I'm more concerned with is Uh, one, I want you to explain what you understand about this process, just so we say it out loud. We don't have your good brother Glenn Kirshner, who's an amazing brain on the prosecutor side. But what you see in it, and then a little bit about what this action says to the guy who probably a couple of years ago was like, I don't think I want to get in trouble. I wouldn't want anything to happen to me because there might be consequences. And now he's like, oh, there's no consequences. Oh well, shit.
Well, first let's lay the groundwork for folks just joining us. What we're talking about
Right.
is first on a macro level, the Trump administration by design attempting to erase history. And that's not an overly dramatic statement. Whether it's Fulton County election ballots, or Maricopa County, Arizona election ballots, Janine Pirro announcing, telling a judge today that we're trying to give money back to January 6th convicts who had to pay into a fund as part of their sentence.
Mhm.
Um, and now, of course, maybe the most outrageous, although whenever I say this is the most outrageous, tomorrow there'll be something even worse. But the news
Like
that,
our elevator's working, thank God, and then it stops in the middle of a very tall building, a blackout, and everyone looks at me like, "Really? You had
yeah,
to say it?"
yeah, yeah. I mean, the news that the administration is seeking to dismiss the charges that led to convictions for seditious conspiracy, arguably the second most grave charge in the United States Penal Code is seditious conspiracy. Conspiracy. The only thing worse, in my humble opinion, is being charged with treason, which is aiding and abetting the enemy in a time of war.
Right.
Um,
And since
we
Congress declares war, it just kind of ad hoc. We won't have that kind of charge for a while.
True. So, what does it mean when we're going to take the most serious convictions coming out of January 6th violence
Hmm.
against the Oath Keeper and Proud Boys leadership,
Correct.
Enrique Terrio on the Proud Boys side, Stuart Rhodes on the Oath Keeper side, and a handful of their deputies.
Mhm.
What does it mean if those charges? Because you say, well, wait. You might say, many of our viewers might say, well, wait a minute. I thought the president pardoned everybody. Yes, he did. But
Mhm.
apparently, that's not good enough for the worst of the worst. We keep hearing, with regard to ICE arrests, we're arresting the worst of the worst, and they're not. But the worst of the worst on January 6th were absolutely the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys leaders who were charged with, as I said, the second most grave crime you can be charged with in this country, which is seditious conspiracy. And they were the only ones, Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. What does it mean when pardoning them is not enough, but rather the actual decision to charge them has to go away and be erased?
Mhm.
It means, Chris, that my grandkids in their history books in school someday
Hmm.
will likely not even learn that January 6th happened and that people were held accountable for it. And then to answer your question, what does it say to the hope of a deterrence that you're going to spend years in prison if you try to overthrow the government? You know this because you're deeply into monitoring some of the extremist channels.
Right.
You know, as do I, that many of the far right violent extremists were saying, I'm not going to that event or that rally because I think it's a setup by the feds, or I don't want to go to prison. It's clear that over 1,000 arrests and convictions did have a deterrent effect on future violence. Why? Because the bad guys were actually talking about it as the reason why they were never going to go to DC again.
Right.
And now
In fact, I'll
it's
add
it's
audience.
gone.
Yeah, I'll add this to the audience is that what I was doing at the time was, as a researcher at a terrorism firm, is gathering materials from Parler, from Telegram, and infiltrating because I'm not exactly bound by the Fourth Amendment the way you guys were. I can sort of get invited in, and I can go sit in a crowd as a private citizen researcher and get invited in, and then maybe if you would help me explain to the audience how someone like me helps people in the FBI, where we become essentially informants, because I found it actually kind of a bit refreshing that we couldn't just call up FBI and say, hey, I saw bad things. There's a standard. There's a little bit of a firewall of bullshit, to make sure that you guys just don't get overwhelmed with data and just every bad thing we think we see. And so we had a lot of work that had to happen in the digital realm alone to kind of weed through the edge lording that happens and some threats, but there was a line definitely in the online world of fear of fed posting, fear of infiltration, that I do know some colleagues who also use that to deter behavior, not with the government. These are not people in the government. They would just sort of imply that people were being monitored, which started shutting people in those groups to behave a little bit better.
Chris, you're breaking up, and it's not unexpected since you literally survived a barrage of missiles last night in Kiev. But your connection, I am getting a message that Chris's connection is internet connection is broken. You got me now, Chris? Can you hear me?
But
Okay. Yeah, you've turned off your video, which should help with the signal, right? Well, let me do some talking while we work on Ukraine and Kiev. And it's astounding that we were able to hear the Artemis 2 astronauts loud and clear from the moon. But sometimes Substack will not work, particularly if you're in Kiev, Ukraine. But while we're working on that, I want to just say that
get back.
I am disgusted by the notion that Stuart Rhodes and the like of Enrique Tarrio may have their records totally expunged as if it never happened. And
Right.
literally, as a former law enforcement officer, when you run somebody, if they totally expunge this, if that's what they do, when you pull somebody over for a traffic violation, an officer runs your license plate through NCIC, controlled by the FBI, and gets your record to know whether they can safely approach your car or not.
Hmm.
And how about not knowing that you're approaching the vehicle of somebody who is responsible for the kind of violence that led to police officers being beaten, having heart attacks and strokes, and vandalizing the United States Capitol? How about not knowing that because their record will be vaporized?
Exactly. We connected. We got our
Yeah,
camera back.
yeah, you're loud and clear.
Good, good, good. I switched my 5G back off, 5G back on. But that's exactly the point. Is that these guys, like, I know that Stuart Rhodes did go out and do a little bit of a ground game this last summer into the fall, saying that, well, I still haven't been pardoned. I'm still, I want some of my rights back, and was playing martyr. And his son said in my interview with him in 2024 that that's what he thought he would do.
You've had some insights and you've written about your conversations with Stuart Rhodes' son. And again, for those not familiar, Stuart Rhodes was the founder and leader of the Oath Keepers. And Oath Keepers largely, the ranks of them are filled with the former military and former law enforcement. Hence, people thinking they're going to keep their oath even though they are no longer public servants. Sad that keeping your oath to them means somehow becoming violent in defense of one man. But tell us about, Chris, your the insights you gleaned about Stuart Rhodes by talking to his son.
So part of it is that there was a few things that were very strange about him. Is that he says, one, his hygiene is god awful. That he has no real discipline. That he has no real core identity. That his identity is built in his kind of negotiating current reality at all times. And that's something that took a lot to get my head around, because I don't really know a lot of people like that. Many people I know who essentially have no core personality, and that everything is a presentation. And that's, again, it's a little bit out of my own personal realm, so I can't really relate to it. I had just have to accept that what I was seeing after that was very much in that context.
Wow, there's a lot right there, from the son who's now an adult, correct, and
Yeah,
considering a run for office in Minnesota.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that caught my attention that you just said is, I think you said negotiating the current reality, which often might describe a narcissist, like to the extreme. Like you know, the truth is what I say it is at this moment, but that could change in an hour. And
right.
um, and it's certainly not about me, although it sounds like it's about Stuart Rhodes a lot. I just like you, I interviewed his ex-wife, and in fact,
Yeah.
when I say ex, I don't even know if that divorce has been finalized yet. Do you?
It's been finalized, but he has partial custody. And pardon to our viewers, they said they weren't seeing the camera, so I toggled it on and off, and now we're good. He has 50% custody, which means he actually still has some control over whether she can leave the state.
Whoa!
That,
So there are still kids who are minors, is what you're telling me? Yeah.
yes, I
Okay.
think there's two.
Okay. So one of the many takeaways when I interviewed her, and you could find that interview I did with her if you were to search my old podcast called The Bureau with Frank Figliuzzi, even maybe on my website, you'll find that if you were to put in Bureau with Frank Figliuzzi and Rhodes,
Yeah.
you'll get the interview. But one of my takeaways was the amount of violence and threats inside that household.
Yes,
And
and the absolute control over all actions.
yeah, I mean, threatening to kill the family dog, slamming your daughter against the wall, frequent display of firearms in a threatening manner
Hmm.
toward the family members.
Hmm.
And I got to tell you, I don't think that's unusual when we're talking about violent extremists. I think that their inner life reflects turmoil and violence,
Hmm.
and of course, so does their. In fact, I think they to some degree they mask it successfully externally to the kind of charm and the kind of public speaking skills that somebody like Stuart Rhodes or Enrique Terrio have
Right.
is is to the extent to which they can restrain and mask their violence that's likely going on elsewhere.
Right. Yeah, especially at home. Said in that interview, and I've talked to him a lot online since then. In fact, Dakota will be likely coming on to Substack here with us. He'd be glad to talk to you. He'll come on and talk with me. He's already got an account on here. He's very busy trying to, again, grow as a young man and a very amazing young man, but he had to stand up to defend his sister against a man he refers to not as dad or father, but as Stuart.
Yeah.
Um, he holds him in a very big distance verbally in a way I'm again not used to seeing people having to do unless there's some grand betrayal. And then I remember with Tasha when she first emerged in the public. Same thing with Kelly Jones, the ex-wife of Alex Jones. There were entire crowds that were going after them. There were minions of those two goons. And I have always had a good amount of volunteer folks in my counterterrorism work and counter-extremism work, where I essentially pass the order around: go protect them, keep an eye on the accounts that are tracking them, anyone serious, monitor back here. Reached out, got to know them, and said, if something odd happens, let me know. I'll pass it on to people with a little bit more oomph. And they're stronger now, both of them, especially. I know Tasha more, but they got stronger as time went on because of support from people like our viewers who,
Yeah.
show care.
Yeah.
Um, but the violence in verbal form is only part of it. It's the gaslighting and control around their lives that continues to this day. And you mentioned not only that they're going to be wiping the record, not so much the record in the sense that it ever happened. There'll be some parts will stay there, but the consequences. But we were talking about the restitution. What happens with a Stuart Rhodes who has money now and has some resources back in his pocket?
Well, all right. So, and the reason why we're talking about even the notion of restitution is partly it's been a buzz within the Beltway recently that there's going to be some form of restitution to the January 6th defendants, and I don't know how much that will be, but we saw just a glimpse of that today, where the U.S. Attorney, you know her, you love her, Judge Janine Pira, in the District of Columbia,
Yeah,
her former Fox News host or host, I don't know,
yeah.
panelist. She filed something in court today, which basically I can synopsize like this. Hey, Judge, we've been battling on trying to get money back to these identified January 6th defendants,
Hmm.
I believe. And the background on that is if you were convicted, you in January 6th, you had to pay a certain amount of money into a fund that had been established.
Hmm.
I think part of that fund had to do with reparations, repairing the capital, but other things as well. And it wasn't a lot of money. In this case, she's referring to $575 that each of these couple of defendants had to pay, and she
Right,
wants to give it back. She wants to give it back to them,
right.
and because they were pardoned like nothing ever happened. And she's having a bureaucratic snafu with the court clerk, who understandably isn't in the habit of giving money back to people from a semi-private fund that's been established. So she said, Judge, I think we figured it out. Can you please tell the clerk how to claw back this money out of the fund, and then we'll return it to these convicts.
Right.
And that's a glimpse today, folks, on what is coming. We got a glimpse of it. And can you imagine if the over 1,000 people arrested and or convicted in the January 6th insurrection are all going to get money back? And even not just money they were required to put in a fund, but if they're to actually get some kind of quote unquote damages, mental distress, loss of income, that's our taxpayer dollars going to restore them. And if somebody, the likes of which Stuart Rhodes, Enrique Terrio, is, let's say they get, I don't know, half a million, $1 million for wrongful conviction or some nonsense. What they can do with that is start all over again on steroids.
And exactly, and I want to go a little bit, if you don't mind, because of your particular experience. When I was putting that article together a couple days ago into this, I went through all the five. I know both of the cases really well because I worked on them contemporaneously. But I read through those, and I was really flashing back to when they first started rolling out. That we had a couple of the Oath Keepers named, and then we get the first superseding indictment, the second superseding indictment, the third, then the fourth, and the fifth superseding indictment. And people like me who didn't work in that cool firm like you did called the FBI, we like to read behind the redactions. And we found that there were different clues because we were so up close to the data where we're weaving this together. But we don't have the resources you guys do. So would you mind explaining to our viewers a little bit about the investigation side that as you see it, that had to have gone into really exposing that conspiracy on either the Proud Boys side with their I forget the name of their the Jan 6. They had a Signal chat group, but I forget the name of it off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But they had a coordinators group, and then same thing with the Oath Keepers. There was a lot of data, and then when investigators from FBI etc. come along, no one's going to just tell the truth. It has to be picked
Yeah.
apart. What had to have gone into that? And then more important is where does that lead to the future when such events may have to be done in some other case?
What a great question, because there's a couple of unfortunate responses here. So first, yeah, although we keep hearing about deep state weaponization of government, the reality is that the agents and prosecutors who had to build a seditious conspiracy charge, remember that is a rare, seldom used, gravely serious charge.
Hmm.
You are now talking about human sources. You're
Hmm.
talking about evidence that includes communications. So you've seized people's texts, emails, phone conversations. You're
Hmm.
mapping out chronologically when they were talking together to conspire and give instructions.
Hmm.
You're talking about geolocating people at certain places and times and putting them together. You're proving that that his team took, both teams, Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, took specific actions at the direction of their leadership.
Very much so.
And so whether it was to, hey, let's stash weapons here, here, and here around the Beltway. Let's put them in this hotel, and it actually happened.
Hmm.
That to get prosecutors to decide, I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm going forward with one of the most serious crimes on the books, and I'm going to make it happen. And then to win is remarkable, and the effect of it being complete, not only the pardons, but now a move to expunge it completely from the record, is where we are today with regard to what it's like to recruit solid people as FBI agents and prosecutors. One of the In the last 40 hours, I heard a statistic that floored me, which is that at least, as far as we know, 25% of the attorneys, the prosecutors at DOJ are gone. DOJ is operating at best at 75% capacity. In some offices, everybody's gone, like Minneapolis. The U.S. Attorney's Office responsible for Minnesota has had it, and they walked in terms of a dozen or more, and some of your most experienced people. So what's it like now to, the deflation of working a case like that? I guarantee you the most serious case any agent or prosecutor would ever work, seditious conspiracy, and then to have it pulled out from under you, and then try to recruit people to come in now that you want to be prosecutors and agents. And I am hearing story after story, Chris, at U.S. attorneys' offices around the country that they cannot recruit talented people. And for the first time, perhaps in our history, U.S. attorneys' offices are willing to take students right out of law school. Right, I mean, just graduated from law. That's unheard of for United States attorneys, who typically are very seasoned lawyers, former county and state prosecutors. It's an honor to move up to the varsity, up to the federal level. And now they are desperate enough to beg students coming out of law school to be assistant United States attorneys.
Well, I'm having a little bit of a flashback that's unrelated to your field, but may give you a good question here. When I was teaching new people at the radio station how to do journalism, there was a young woman who walked in and said, "Well, I have this story, and I just need a little help." And I said, "Sure. What can I help you with?" And you would have young agents, right, would come to you for advice on how to handle something. So tie these two together like this. She says, "Well, it, well, how do I present it?" I said, "Well, what's wrong with it?" She goes, "Well," um, and she was trying to explain what Fox News does about fair and balanced without using the phrase, and went, "Oh, oh, okay, wow, okay, I hadn't thought about that." Hadn't no one else was really going to ask that question. I go, "Okay, is poverty a right or left issue?" Well, it's neither, right? And I went through a whole series of things. Oh, okay, and the light went off of, "Don't worry about Fox, just go tell the story." But the fact that she had to ask that question shows how corruption in news affected a person who genuinely is trying to do a good job, wants to do a good job going forward. So I feel the same thing is a problem in the level of law enforcement the FBI has, is that you have young people who, born in the 2000s, for instance, not in the 90s, not in the 80s. I was born in 69.
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
come
Sure.
forward, and they're going to have to ask questions now in this modern era of craziness that you guys didn't have to ask, even though you came after Hoover, etc.
Right. True. And you mentioned journalism. The same thing I think is happening in journalism. Imagine now with the pressure that's being put on the press, every time you ask a question of the president, every time you publish a story, you're getting sued. You're getting called, particularly if you're a female reporter, you're getting called all kinds of names. You're disgusting. You're nasty.
Yeah.
Um, why don't you ever print something good? The Pentagon has tossed reporters out entirely. You have to sign an ND. You have to sign a promise that you're only going to report what the Pentagon feeds you. Now you want what's happening to journalism programs? What young person is going to look at that and go, yeah, I think I'll major in journalism. We may be losing a generation of young journalists.
Well, I said when people would tell me they were trying to get a degree in Homeland Security because I was a civilian working counterterrorism, why would you want to do such a thing? I don't do this because I want to do it. I just have skills. I had no ambition in my field. I just had skills, so I kept applying them until all of a sudden it was what I did every day. But the idea that someone would want to do this, first thing I do is like, "Come here. We need to get you a therapist. Something's wrong with
Yeah,
you." You
yeah.
know.
It's a beatdown every day for agents, prosecutors, and journalists every single day, and eventually Stockholm syndrome kicks in. And why is it so? For example, all of us sit back and watch these press conferences, right? Or the little quick pressers on when Trump is on his way to the helicopter or to the plane, and he
Right.
stops and answers questions, and all of us sit back and go, "I could have wait a minute. Why aren't you asking the follow up? Why aren't you asking? Are you insane? Why did where did you get that from? Why don't they, when he claimed I've talked remember weeks ago, I've talked to former presidents and they tell me they wish they had attacked Iran. Nobody's saying what names please, names, because we and nobody's saying, sir, we checked every goddamn living former president and not one of them talked with you. What are you telling us? Nobody does that.
Mhm.
And it happens every day. And I believe that's part of the Stockholm syndrome and corporate fear. And I need my job. And my editor's going to yell at me because now my press credentials got pulled from the White House. And
Mhm.
here we are. Here we are.
Well, this book behind me, which I've told many of times when we've had you on, is a very important book that has been in my arsenal since I've been here for 4 years. It is a guidebook of integrity and bravery, and bravery is a very important road I want to walk down with you on this one. It takes a lot to push through the BS that's happening in the corruption of the DOJ, the FBI, the media, the White House. And what do you think? We're going to have to do as sort of a little bit older generation. We're not old yet, but we've got a little bit of years on us, where we have to sort of tell a new generation of 20s and 30-year-olds, You got to push through with that anyway. And here's why. What would you say, since you wrote this really really incredible book over my shoulder?
Well, first, you're very kind. It's
Everybody go buy the book. It's a great book. Buy a real copy, no used ones.
the and I do narrate the book if you want to get the audio copy.
And it's in Ukrainian.
And it's been published in Ukrainian, which blows me away. But anyway, I wrote that book because I could no longer take, years ago, I could no longer take the bureau bashing by Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to write something that said, this has been my experience, 25 years in the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what you're hearing from Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, they operate often in life and death conditions under high stress every day, and they get it right most of the time. And here's how they do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about values based leadership. Okay, that book, no, who could have timed this, is released the week after January 6th, the insurrection. And it becomes a national bestseller, not because I'm some incredible writer, but rather I am on TV every day with that insurrection coverage.
Right.
And they're saying, hey, and by the way, Frank has a new book. But people were longing to hear about this agency that may have messed up with January 6th. So, and now fast forward to where we are today with this administration, and the book is no longer viewed as here's how great the FBI is, but rather here's how it used to be and could be and needs to be again someday. So I am encouraged by the fact, Chris, that I get messages from young people who are either thinking about the FBI, or even better, I'm getting messages from people in the FBI right now saying they've pulled out the book. They're reading it for the first time.
Good.
And that is very heartening to me, because a lot of these people who are contacting me are right on the fence of whether to leave or not. And what I tell them is, look, if you leave, you better turn out the lights when you walk out because there's nobody left.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're reading the book, it gives me hope. So unless you're asked to do something immoral or illegal, you need to hang in there until that moment comes. And if that moment comes, you then need to make a decision as to whether you're going to fight or whether you're going to quietly leave. And that's a personal decision based on things like I have to feed my family, I can't afford a lawsuit,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. But that's going on right now in the halls of FBI field offices. And what I tell young people is, look, and they do reach out to me, people considering the career. And I say, look, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. If you're still in college, it will have passed. It will have passed. Uh, so I try to encourage them and tell them my stories. I never try to talk somebody into it,
Mm-hmm.
because if you need to be talked into being an FBI agent or analyst or any other position in the bureau, then you're probably not ready for it.
Yeah.
Probably not. Yeah.
I think it's important right now. I think it's very important for people to recognize that. And let's move it beyond just the FBI. We have people in other state law enforcement, state prosecution, local law enforcement that are going to be put in very, very difficult times, and these words matter to them, I think.
Yeah, we're gonna need a generation that wants to make things better and
Mm-hmm.
thinks this is the rub. So lots of young people, God bless them, have the energy and the vision. They want to make things better. The second part of now what I'm about to say is the hard part these days. And they then must view government and public service as one way to do that. And that's what worries me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not sure that, again, my grandkids are going to, based on however history plays out, Chris, are going to go, yes, I want to make things better. And I think being a public servant is the way to go because I have so much faith in government. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
It depends.
As a person who spent 25 years in the FBI, as a human in front of us, I'm gonna put you on the spot. How does that feel to you as a person, as an
Oh,
American, and as a person?
look, yeah, when you dedicate 25 years of your life to anything, and it truly is a sacrificial. I don't want to sound like I had a miserable 25 years. I had a blast and it was an adventure. But, your life is not your own. And to have done that for 25 years, and then see the kind of death by a thousand cuts that's occurring,
Right.
and the FBI totally politicized. And look, I addressed this issue in the book. I'm not some of the criticism of the bureau was deserved.
Sure.
And I know we're not here to talk about Jim Comey and Hillary Clinton and all of that,
But the
but I will
history,
say this.
a lot of different eras that affect different communities. We talked about this in the past, where there are communities that have like, oh, I remember COINTELPRO, or they, certain things with the government where they felt unfairly maligned with a very powerful institution, but it went through changes. So I think part of what I know you're always about the glimmering new, the good possibility of good news is that since it's happened before, where what was seen as bad, became good, or you often talk about how you guys had to go to the Holocaust Museum, or there were ways that your training evolved
Yeah.
because of you know. What do you think will happen next, or could happen next? Let's say it that way.
Well, if you're talking about a positive vision, then it would be that this passes
Mm-hmm.
and we get new leadership at all the agencies.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to clean house and figure out who's who.
Yeah.
And yes, things that prior directors had done, which is, and I've talked about this before, new agent classes visit the Holocaust Museum in DC. Why? Because they're taught this is what happens when a law enforcement and government uh, driven society goes haywire and authoritarianism is implanted. This is the worst that can happen. They go visit the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial and they're taught of the awful history of abuses
Mm-hmm.
the FBI brought against the civil rights movement and MLK in particular.
Yeah.
They learn from history, right? So what are we seeing right now? Hopefully that would be restored. But I'm sorry to sound pessimistic, but look at the curriculum that's been banned in our schools right now. Look at the books that have been banned in libraries and schools. You don't teach the Holocaust in some school systems because you know why? It makes kids feel bad about our history. You don't teach slavery because that's focusing on a bad part of our history and it makes people feel bad. The books that we read as high schoolers, Anne Frank's diary, Night by Elie Wiesel, books on slavery. uh, if literally history is devoid moving forward, if history is devoid of those lessons, then we won't know
Yeah.
how it's supposed to be done and what to avoid.
And it's really unfortunate. And I think that one of the things that concerns me is that, especially with people being very, bombarded with what I call cognitive warfare, or as Steve Bannon calls it, flooding the zone, and we'll bring up him in just a second. Um, is that we're human. We are not machines. I know living in war, I have days where I had this happen about a week ago where I just crawled in bed and stayed in bed on a Monday. And I work every day. I have no problem working every day. I love to work. I love what I do. I love the context of what I do, but I love what I do. It's my therapy is to just keep working. And then one day I went, I just can't do it. I have to rest today. Um, and the same thing is with human beings going through this now with, No Kings and others. As some release, there's just a bombardment of news that's just bad, and it is partially designed to shut them down entirely.
Yeah.
So I think that we collectively have to work together to boost each other and also remind each other, take a break, go for a walk,
Yeah.
go to a pond somewhere or whatever gives you that bit of peace, and then come back and work together to push through.
Well,
Um,
I just want to echo what you're saying, because there's no better person to remind us of this than someone who's literally living in Kiev, Ukraine. Literally, was it last night or last night, or you told me the night before last? Yeah, and I'm waiting for you in the morning to tell me you survived, because the missiles were incoming and there were deaths and young people and old people and you know
that night.
yeah, you're living through constant bombardment on a physical, literal level, and here we are. Those of us who are paying attention
Yeah.
are being bombarded with evil, with existential questions about our society and our government. And you say, well, you took a Monday off. Okay, yes, we need to take time away from social media, away from the news. One of the things I've learned is, if I go on vacation and I don't get called upon for a broadcast, um, I can catch up. I can catch up with what happened tomorrow in an hour. I can catch, if I really want to, I can catch up on a Friday and get the whole week, you know, in an hour. And you don't need to stay plugged in every second. Um, and those of us who are in the business of summarizing the week's news, hello, we try to provide that service to you as well.
And I love we have a lot of viewers here. We have 400 people watching right now, and I want to say that you and I think we share this. We both have a passion for bringing quality information to people who are obviously seeking quality information. And so there's a lot of time that goes into the research of what's going on before we open our mouths. And I like when you doing your presentations, you have a really nice pad of paper with your presentation items really well laid out. And I know you did that professionally as part of your job. That's what makes the FBI so cool. And I will take a side note. The actual writer behind Twin Peaks wrote me today, who created my favorite FBI character besides you, Dale Cooper.
I'm not a character, although some would accuse me of that. So the writer of Twin Peaks contacted you today?
Yeah, Mark Frost is a friend of mine. He's the
Okay.
actual created pretty much Twin Peaks. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Mark, the only person I've ever went fanboy on, and still do because I love Mark Frost. But he knows we're doing this show tonight, and I said thank you for making me more interested in the FBI. Um, but essentially, when we're doing this work, there's a lot of times where we're really down into data that's very, atomized, and there's so many moving parts. And we're in this era now where, like, yesterday I put together the Tulsi Gabbard trying to rewrite the impeachment, which is what we're going to pivot to. And you have to go back through all this stuff that you already went through before,
Yeah.
like with the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. I did reread all those um, indictments again in order to write my article, and then I had to go through the same thing with the impeachment. I had to go through, okay, who did what, and it's really maddening. So I want to pivot to that a little bit
Yeah.
because you know one of the things I found as I was reading it and then went back and read what she made in her claims was like, well, you answered the question in your own position yesterday, Tulsi. You literally kind of said nothing with your major investigation. So, what do you read in that sphere, especially since your other great skill set is counterintelligence and that outside era? And I know FISA vote you were talking about on your program earlier passed last night. Let's pivot a little bit to that realm of the national security side of how wiping the record is going to be creating some problems.
Yeah, so it's not just about the January 6th convictions going away or the charges going away. It's about attacking not just the ballots in Maricopa County and Fulton County, and making people think there really was something wrong with the 2020 election. It's also erasing the impeachment proceedings against Trump. And Tulsi Gabbard is at the root of that. Apparently, she's gotten very little to do in the office. So you know, she can fly to
Is
Georgia
this
and
what the DNI is supposed to be doing? You know that
yeah.
better.
Well, I got to tell you
Yeah.
though, I have to tell you, since I believe she's wholly unqualified to be the DNI, it's actually refreshing to hear that she's not doing anything in the office. And she's just a lackey for trying to suck up to Trump and please don't fire me. So I'm going to go to Fulton County and seize ballots. And I'm going to now the latest for those who don't know what we're talking about. The latest is that she's made this big announcement that she's looked into, the perfect phone call that Trump made, to Ukraine that resulted in a whistleblower complaint that ultimately resulted in an impeachment. Okay, she's now looked at the intelligence community inspector general and how he handled that whistleblower complaint initially. And she's determined that he handled it improperly. And therefore, now you're going to hear my bias come through now. But basically, what she's saying is, and because I've determined that I think he handled it improperly, then therefore, if he had handled it properly, God darn it, we never would have heard the truth about the quid pro quo phone call with Ukraine. And we never would have gotten to the impeachment. So, I mean, you can look, but I laugh at this because it's a comical, what lawyers would call the fruit of the poisonous tree argument. Because how you found this information and handled it is improper. By the way, I don't think he handled it improperly, just so you know. But
Right.
if a police officer breaks into your trunk without a warrant and finds amazing evidence, it could all get discarded as fruit of the poisonous tree. And what Tulsi's trying to argue here is, I have determined that the inspector general who handled this did it wrong, and therefore everything should get tossed. And God darn it, we would never have known that Trump tried to bribe Ukraine. So- but I laugh, but the Fox News people are playing this over and over again,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
Tulsi is,
And
that's it.
Carolyn Levitt put it out on a website that was like ausa.us instead of like a legitimate news service that I'm familiar with. It was very like, wait, you didn't at least have Newsmax? You didn't. What is
Right.
this?
Right. And if we don't keep up with all this is you mentioned the fatigue, you mentioned the bombardment,
Yeah.
but it's if we don't keep up with this, and I'm not suggesting all of our viewers need to go because we'll try to do this for you. But I have to tell you, it would be very easy to gloss this right over because in many cases, like the folks at MS Now might think, well, this is so silly, it's not even worthy of coverage.
Hmm.
Or we've got other things to talk about, like the Iranian war,
Right.
and boom. But what we would miss is that half the population now thinks that at least the Ukraine phone call impeachment was totally bogus
Hmm.
because Tulsi did her job. So you got to. That's why we need people like you to pay attention and say, well, Tulsi tried to make the impeachment go away, and you know, and it's happening every day.
Well, we had JD Vance just brag the other day, and it's like a volcano in my belly and my spirit, especially with missiles flying over my head. My viewers saw me get really, really nuclear level angry in the middle of those missiles flying. When I went, oh, JD Vance, yeah, you're proud that you stopped the supply of weapons to defend Ukrainians. So yeah, thanks, man. Like, appreciate it, man. Like, how Christian of you. Um, so
Mm.
it's really maddening, but at the same time, I'm really concerned on, when we step back, and one of the things I try to always do is step back and look at who's benefiting from this. Who is it that's most happy? And because you're, experienced with counterintelligence, you know that there are folks working around DC who come and go, who are looking for vulnerabilities and ways to get into our systems, both digitally and physically.
Yeah.
Nearing. How bad do you think we are in that sense, with your good spidey sense of many years of doing counterintelligence?
Chris, there's a couple ways to look at this. So from a counter intel standpoint and adversaries,
Yeah.
uh, you could say that, and I've said this before, Russia would have paid billions of dollars to divide us and put us in this vulnerable place. They would have given their right arm to make this happen, and
Yeah.
it's largely happened internally. Not to say there hasn't been proven help from Russia,
Right.
but we've largely accomplished this by ourselves,
Right.
with lots of propaganda and misinformation coming from foreign powers. Yeah, yes. So the who's who's benefiting from this? One of the vulnerabilities that I believe is happening beyond the obvious. We've got ill qualified people at the Pentagon. Hegseth doesn't know what he's doing. My humble opinion.
Is selfish and evil. I'm gonna start doing Pulp Fiction lines now. I just hear Pete Hegseth, and I start quoting Pulp Fiction in my head for the last couple of
Yeah,
days.
yeah. That I don't. Well, he's gonna. I'm sure he's going to come out and go. I was just joking. Of course, I knew it was that scripture was from Pulp Fiction. There's no such scripture. I'm sure, but um, so we're very vulnerable militarily. We're extremely vulnerable from a terrorism standpoint because, again, we don't even know the exact number, but it's in the thousands of FBI personnel that have left, fired, walked out, retired as soon as they could, resigned. It's in the thousands.
Right.
And some of the most senior folks who've been there, done that, know how to work a terrorism threat are gone. The average age of SACs, special agents in charge of field officers, is very young now, very young.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so we're we're particularly vulnerable. The other thing is, though, if I'm an adversarial foreign intelligence service
Mm-hmm.
and I see the droves of former government employees leaving with a secret clearance, top secret clearance, they're gone. All those prosecutors I talked about, all the agents I talked about, multiply that across the agencies,
Mm-hmm.
Centers for Disease Control, you name it. Those intel services sit there and monitor the job boards, whether it was, I don't know if monster.com is still out there, but LinkedIn jobs,
Right.
you Indeed, all of those, right? And what do they look for? They have algorithms. Um, Cyber expert, U.S. government, top secret clearance, right? Very proudly, you need to say because it's a commodity. I
Yeah.
I I held the TS clearance. That's a big deal to get a job, and they sit there and go, I think that we're going to approach this person. I think we're going to offer them a consulting job. I think they need money. They've been fired. They can't feed the family. They start looking into it. They have college age kids. They can't pay tuition. There's a medical issue in the family.
Sudden
That's
change.
how-
Good one right there, because a sudden change in employment for someone in that stress is going to create a financial stress they might not normally have had.
yeah, and they're angry. They're angry because right? They're angry. So, yes, we're vulnerable perhaps the most vulnerable we've been since 9/11. Absolutely. More so, perhaps.
Oh my lord! I'm going to draw a parallel also to part of what you're saying when I think of the phrase institutional memory, and I want to get it a little bit more personal on how it works. Here with the attrition of Russian soldiers in the military and also Ukrainian soldiers in the military, when we say institutional memory, it's almost like it for me. It doesn't do enough to explain what we lost because I have 12 years of a lot of work in this particular field we're talking about, where it's like I had you could ask me questions to just precipitate knowledge, and it is there. I could almost instinctively answer questions because of all the work that's done. Where
Yeah.
someone who got into it like recently as a hobby or like just a couple years ago, they're very smart, they're reading all the time, but they don't have that depth in there, and that depth is really what we mean by institutional memory in a way that the ability, like my kung fu side kicks in and says, the
Yeah.
trigger is so good. Um,
Yes.
Here in war, we have people who go out and train, but if they're standing next to someone who's done the same repetitious behavior for 10 years, for 7 years or 8 years or some number that's really, really significant, you can't learn that in 2 or 3 weeks, no matter how smart you are.
Well, you can't, and we're hearing. So look, to take you kind of inside a field office or headquarters of the FBI, it becomes, I call it muscle memory. You
Muscle memory, right?
sadly, sadly, it's like the old days when kidnapping was kind of new to the FBI, decades and decades ago. And you develop this muscle memory. Okay, we've got to kidnap. Here we now it's down to a science, right? Here's what we're going to do. Boom, 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 and those agents know it, and the analysts know it, and it's a thing. It's quite a thing to watch, quite honestly. And they'll work until you send them home. They'll be up all night. You'll activate your command center. The same thing to work a terrorist threat. Exact same thing. Those terrorists, those JTTF agents and officers, they know it. And your deputy, if you're the head of an office, your deputy who handles counterterrorism and all those squads and the task force, they guess where they came from? The counterterrorism division at headquarters. They're specialists. They're specialists, and they've done it. They could do it with one hand behind their back. We're going to put the surveillance on these for people. We're going to go get a FISA warrant. We're going to blah blah. Bring in the prosecutors into the office. The prosecutors are going to sit here all night with us. They're
Right,
going to write search warrants. They're going to blah blah blah.
right,
It's muscle memory, and it's a thing of beauty.
right.
And if you don't have those years of experience,
Hmm.
if I have to literally step in every 5 minutes as the head of the office and go, hold it, did we do that? Did you do that? Did you forget this? Now we're falling apart. And that's my concern. And that's what I'm hearing is the concern.
And I have some of that. When you're saying that, I'm thinking of how did my days evolve from, 16 years ago when I was just asking questions as a journalist about terrorism, and suddenly 2 years later I'm doing stuff. Is that if you and you know how I am a little bit on this level. I see something, I secure it, and then I read it. I don't read it and then secure it later. I As soon as I see the contact of a document, I secure it locally, and then I go read it a little bit later over coffee. A new person might not stop to think about that, where they're like, "Oh yeah, I think that's important. I should go back and I should maybe go get that document, or I should file that particular form or something that is as you said, muscle memory. My muscle memory on certain things is still really good. God, I was trying to retire from terrorism work when I got here to deal with Russian terrorism, but I'm glad that I have it because I have instincts when I hear testimony about stuff. I can hear layers deeper in it than someone who probably just got into it a couple of years ago or just started arriving to the topic, because there's just so many things that I'm going, where do I remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Well, there's also, I'll tell you another area that it comes up with. It's interview and interrogation. So
Thank you.
um, it can take years for an agent to develop the skill set to sit across from somebody, particularly under pressure of threat, right? There's a bomb that's going to go off. We think we're looking at a terrorist attack. We're not sure.
Hmm.
And you want your best, I've been there, done that. You want your best interviewer. And sometimes it doesn't matter where they come from in the office.
Yeah.
They might be an organized crime agent. It does At that point, it doesn't matter. And you might offend some terrorism agent, but you need somebody who's
Right.
going to be able to look at this guy in the eye and say he is or is not telling me the truth, or he is or he's not a terrorist.
Right.
And um, I don't know if that skill set's there. I don't. I think they're retired. They're gone.
Yeah, and I know you covered Savannah Guthrie's mom's case. I don't want to get into the details of that, but we have things to keep evolving, like new data that's out. But you covered it very well, and you gave a lot of insight to our viewers of how you guys operate in those moments and all the things that were necessary for the public to understand it. And I do want all of our friends to consider something. If you're not, I'm sure many of you are already subscribed to Frank or following at least, but also do the paid side to reward you for being out here, basically winging it with the rest of us. Hardworking, freelancing types that are just waking up and doing our work, because I know that these viewers, I watch them when you're watching your videos, and that experience you deliver to them is really helps them to understand this chaotic news.
Yeah. Thank you for that. The same goes for you. people need to make a decision. Look, if I'm not completely getting the wholesome news I need, or trusting the 24/7 news cycle and corporate media, I got to go elsewhere to get deeper analysis. And you got to make that decision. And maybe it's the coffee at the coffee shop. It's $5,
Yeah.
$5 a month. And what you get, so far, I've really held to trying to not do any content that requires you to pay. And
Yeah.
God bless the people that are still paying. But now the column I write for Lincoln Square every week, you do, as if you're a paid subscriber to my account, Substack, you will get the whole column, not just a paywall.
Hmm.
You'll get the whole column emailed to you. And I am going to start doing paid subscriber only content,
Yeah.
um, because I'm seeing that's becoming the model. It's becoming the model. And you know, um, my income is my FBI pension, and that's it.
Much. Yeah.
And some
This
people
is
don't even have that, so I
the
understand.
area where they get a more direct access to, and I'll go even further to say this as a big thank you to you, is that I think that the news media outlets, the corporate media that now I just call stenographers, because that's what they are, stenographers. Um, they used guys like you to draw us in. They wanted to bring on people, and they evolved from Michael Savage, Michael Weiner, aka Michael Savage, was on MSNBC in 2000, and CNN used to have Um, the crossfire guys that would go at it. So it's nothing new that they're doing this, Tweedledee and Tweedle left and right and all that. But they're not really helping the viewers to get underneath things. They just mostly repeat whatever the administration says or repeat the kind of notes of the day. And you guys, like you and Glenn Kirshner and others, are really bringing top notch wisdom, experience, and current analysis to this audience. And I know the difference. I can see it every time I watch.
Yeah, so many of us have gone off on Substack and YouTube, and it's really thriving. It's the future. I'm convinced, and you can watch. And I know we're at the hour point, but you can watch the mainstream cable news. They don't know what to do. They're stuck, and one network is literally pretending to be a podcast. I don't know if you've seen that. I don't know how long that's going to last, but they've taken off their coats and they've undone their tie and they've put a microphone in front of them because they think, well, podcasts are very successful. What if we looked like a podcast? So they don't know what to do. Another network has gone out. This is interesting. They've gone out and they've collaborated and even perhaps purchased outright a leading podcast company, and now you can watch the podcast on TV on the weekend. So they're struggling, and here we are, Chris, trying to, we're what they're trying to figure out.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, my is information. So, and my therapy is to just basically bitch into my keyboard in 1,000 words a minute, where I just get very angry about something, and then what I do is I really do step back and go, okay, what is it the audience needs to understand about what just happened in front of us, and I
right.
will go on that. I will go sit down at the coffee shop, and I don't really do my writing there, but I kind of ruminate on what is it that we're not understanding because we've been at this topic for a while now, or whatever the issue is. We've been at it for a while. What is it? What is it about Steve Witkoff traveling to Russia that I need to say? Because we're all ticked about it, but we
That's
got
right. What's the added value we can bring
right.
in terms of analysis, or a nugget that we've pulled out of somewhere? That's the differentiator. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you as a final question because we
Yeah,
got
please.
another 2 hours to go.
No,
Uh,
no,
but
I gotta go.
But one question for you for this audience, and it's on this topic, and then we'll bring you back. And by the way, in a couple of nights we'll have Mark Zaid on to ask more questions about some of the stuff we just talked about, and he's a fantastic, awesome super lawyer. Um, Tell me a little bit about the process of what you're doing, like this program you did earlier, where you're developing, your outline for what you want to share with the audience. What's a little bit of what goes into your day to prepare that presentation for our audience.
Well, you struck a nerve with me when you talked about your process of secure and read later, right? So my week consists of I consume a lot of news and subscribe to a lot of news. And when I see something that intrigues me, I copy it and save it, right? And then when I have critical achieved critical mass, or
Mhm.
I think I have, I'll go through it and I'll like I did today and saved up for a couple of days. And I go, okay, that's actually been covered. There's nothing new here.
Mhm.
Or this is getting more interesting, you
Mhm.
know. And then breaking, Janine Pirro I told the judge she wants to give money back to January 6th people. Today also, Trump posted because he's livid with the decision about to stop construction again on the ballroom. And sometimes you have to read True Social to see that he's going to make an admission, which is that there's an entire state-of-the-art hospital going in, according to him, underneath the ground. And there are, quote, several military installations, plural, going in under the ground. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So once I collect those up, and I'm not sure people are getting all of it, I
Right.
will present it, and you're going to get my spin and my experience and my
Sure.
national security lens through which I see those things. Today, I engaged in some predictive analysis. I've really got my eye on data centers and AI as a target for protest violence. I think, I don't think, the fact that Luigi Mangione um, assassinated the head of United Healthcare, I don't think that resentment against healthcare insurance is going to go away. But I think the newcomer, that if you're in AI, if you work for an AI company or a data center company, you better be ready, because it's already happened in San Francisco, and there's going to be more of it. There's going to be tremendous anger against data centers coming into communities and
Yeah.
what AI represents. And I think we may see, sadly, more Luigi's out there. And it's something I talked about today.
And very true. In Maine, actually, I forget who said this the other day. They said, well, we're Maine. No one would want to come up here and put a data center. And we're going to pass a bill that keeps that from, oh, we can't, oh, wait. And they got backlash immediately. Uh,
Yes.
and it
Yeah.
was astroturfed quite a bit.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and I want to devote a show to data centers because I will learn with you. I will have an expert on, and it's not me. And I want to get to the truth because I keep hearing two sides of the story. Oh, it takes millions of gallons of water. Oh no, they recycle the water. Don't worry about it. Oh no, there's forever chemicals that are put into the water. Blah 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 blah. All right, let's get it. And that's what I enjoy doing when I have the luxury of doing it, as opposed to literally you have 6 minutes on MS Now to talk about this. Goodbye.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
know that.
yeah,
When I would go on TV, like I dressed up a little bit for all you guys tonight. I would normally be sitting around wearing my T-shirt with my Ukrainian something or another, and just kind of venting. But um, no, reason why I did this is because back in the day with counterterrorism work, I would get, like, this. You get that phone call. Hey, are you available for a 2 o'clock bump? Yeah. What is it? Oh, we have the shooting in Ohio. Sure. And you get ready and you set up and you answer a few questions and then it's done and you go back to whatever else you were doing. Whereas here, you and I, in different capacities, we stop and we prepare a presentation for these viewers to walk away with something. And usually, I think of it as sort of like I evolved when I first went on television. I just answered questions. There wasn't a mental get to walk away with. But in time, by the time I was, kind of, Gen 6 especially, I had things, the moment they called, I knew what I wanted to say the next time that I didn't say the last 10 times.
same here. Yeah, same here. I got it. Yeah, I do. Before we sign off, and I need to go. I just want to encourage folks not only to follow Chris, but also give us ideas. I'm open to ideas, not only of topics, but to people to have on. And you can DM me, on my Substack account, the Frank Figliuzzi, or on Instagram, and say, hey, because my last guest, my guest this
Great
week,
guest for the night.
this was Jen Budd, former Border Patrol agent.
I had no idea
Um,
Border Patrol's so crazy.
what a great guest and a great story. And that came to me from viewers who said you need to have Jen Budd on.
Data Center show was awesome too. Your first guest, but your first Lincoln Square guest.
Yeah,
Incredible.
Dre Dossier, Audrey Henson. We've had Senator Sheldon Whitehouse on. We've got another senator lined up. I won't say it until he absolutely can commit, but he said yes. So, so we'll see. But more coming. Hey, thank you, Chris.
Thank you, my man. We'll
Yep.
see you. Everyone
Stay
else,
safe. Stay safe, everybody.
thank you for paying attention to what's going on in the world, in the country, and thank you for supporting Frank's work, my work, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Good night, everybody.